The psychedelic revolution is here. If you want to integrate your visionary experiences into your purpose, get clear on your entrepreneurial path, and help people while you do what you love, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to The Psychedelic Entrepreneur, Medicine for These Times. I'm your host, Beth Weinstein. I'm a spiritual business coach, 3-time entrepreneur, and a lifelong student of psychedelics and sacred plant medicines. You carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times. This podcast will help you to share your medicine so you can create transformation in the world. Listen in on conversations with psychedelic leaders, changemakers, and conscious entrepreneurs who are living proof that a better world is possible when you follow your heart and live in alignment with your soul. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Psychedelic Entrepreneur. I'm so excited today to have Dr. Ingmar Gorman. He is a co-founder and chief executive officer of Fluence, a psychedelic education company training mental health providers in psychedelic treatments. As a psychologist, he shares his expertise in empirically supported psychedelic treatments with his clients and trainees alike. Dr. Gorman received his clinical training in New York City at the New School for Social Research, Mount Sinai Beth Israel Hospital, Columbia University, and Bellevue Hospital. He completed his NIH postdoctoral fellowship at New York University. He also served as site co-principal investigator on an FDA-approved phase 3 clinical trial of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for post-traumatic stress disorder, and is currently a study therapist on the same study, as well as another FDA-approved clinical trial of psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. Dr. Gorman has published on the topics of classic psychedelics, ketamine, MDMA, and psychedelic harm reduction and integration. So Dr. Gorman, I've been following your work for many years. I know you used to live in New York as well as me, and you've always been really at this cutting edge of psychedelic-assisted therapy. Can you tell people, how did you start your career on this path?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Beth, for having me on your podcast. So it began sometime around 2004. Really, the inception was that I had been attending the University of Chicago as an undergraduate my first year, and I wasn't happy there for multiple reasons, and I dropped out. I took a leave of absence and went back to my home, which at the time was Prague, the Czech Republic. And I sort of had a period of, I guess you could say, personal rediscovery. And one really key component of that was getting to know expatriates that were living in the city then, many of them American, and them introducing me to the world of psychedelics, psychedelic research, psychedelic literature. I was 20 at the time, 21, and I had my head full of the drug war propaganda. I was absolutely terrified that if I would take something like LSD, I would lose my mind and never come back. One kind of turning point, I think, for me personally was a budding awareness of the rich history in the former Czechoslovakia in psychedelic research. So many people know Stan Grof, but there are really dozens of mental health professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists who were working with psychedelics above ground, legally, under the Iron Curtain, which really led to a really interesting that's a very rich, intriguing history. In 2005, kind of following this interest, I met Rick Doblin and I said, hey, I want to become a psychedelic therapist. Where do I start? What should I do? And he said, I need to go to New College of Florida, which is the small liberal arts college that he went to. And went there. Long story short, I just continued to be solely focused on psychedelic therapy and psychedelic science. I had various opportunities to do some research in Prague, in the Czech Republic, as it relates to that history, and then doing some studies looking at recorded MDMA therapy from the phase 2 trials, and just continue to develop that relationship with MAPS and Rick until MAPS approached me and asked me if I wanted to be a co-principal investigator or sites co-principal investigator for one of the phase 2 and phase 3 sites in New York City. And I said, yes. Well, initially I said no. I had just been, I vividly remember them. I got a call from Amy Emerson. I was in the Bellevue library, that floor. I was looking out of the window onto the river. And I thought, I'm just getting my PhD. Like I didn't even finish my internship yet at that point. So I wasn't sure if I was up to it. And Amy said, Amy had known me at that point for many years. And she said, no, you can do it. I said, okay. And that was in 2016, 2017. And now we're here today. That's kind of the quick story.
Incredible. And here's what's so incredible. I'm sure if anybody sees this, how fast that moved, right? Like here we are just a few years later. That wasn't that long ago, 2017, right. 2018, which actually leads me to my first big question. What is the most exciting development happening right now with, all these trials, all the potential, legalization, decriminalization? I interviewed Dr. Dan recently, who said, I think you might have said this off camera, I don't remember, but the MDMA is maybe becoming legal by 2023, which is a year from now. But yeah, what is it? I mean, you're in psilocybin therapy studies. What's the most exciting thing to you happening right now?
It's really hard to pick just one. So I think particularly as a therapist on the clinical trial, I have to be really careful about predictions. But yeah, I think Rick will say that it's not unreasonable to expect MDMA therapy to become a prescribable medicine sometime in 2023, 2024. Again, like lots of caveats. We don't know if that's going to actually happen. There needs to be data review. So by no means am I saying that it is going to happen. But so far, the data that has been published is really supportive of it as a potential treatment for PTSD. What excites me the most? Wow. I mean, the place where I spend my day, most of my time at Fluence, is thinking about how we can address the therapist bottleneck issue. And so for maybe the members of your audience who aren't familiar, is that it's really easy to scale a psychedelic compound. You can just, once you go through the right steps and you have GMP, whatever it is, you can then produce a lot of it. But the issue and my sort of love for this field is really that it's psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, right? It's something that these compounds are doing that's synergistic with that therapeutic intervention that makes both stronger. And it's really hard to scale therapy in that way, or therapists, because they're the ones that are going to be, when speaking about psychiatric treatment, they're the ones that are going to be really key. So I spend a ton of time thinking about, how can we not just provide training and education? That's easy, right? Like you can give people information and a therapist, and they can learn it or memorize it. But therapy isn't about just knowing things. It's about a skill. It's about a practice. It's about a relationship. It's about human connection. And I'm really thinking about what are the innovative, engaging, interesting kind of ways that we can address this bottleneck that actually makes therapists or people better at that work. So that's the thing that excites me probably the most.
Yeah, and this is something I've asked other guests, because just me being in this world as a participant, and then this business realm I've been in for many years. And my recent former partner is a somatic therapist. So it was very interesting to watch on a firsthand scale the amount of demand there is from everybody. I mean, it's like we all see that we're in a mental health crisis all over the country, and maybe all over the world on some level. And the amount of inquiries even I get, like I'm not even at all a therapist. I never claimed to be. He would get inquiries. He was a somatic therapist and not an official, New York State licensed psychotherapist with a certain degree, but 6 years of training. And this has come up before, is what about what about this idea of the demand is so high, the supply of actual licensed psychedelic assisted therapists are actually very low, and we all know it's a major inaccessibility problem, right? Like, even I've looked into it, and I'm like, well, you want $1,000 and you have a 2-year waiting list, like on top of it. So I'm curious what your take is on this, and also this idea of what about other therapists who are maybe not board certified, but they're trained, like internal family systems training, or Hakomi, or some other form of somatic experiencing, and maybe multiple years of training but not officially licensed under the whatever state board. Do you feel like there will be a day where they're able to become licensed psychedelic assisted therapists, although they don't have, let's say, a particular psychiatrist degree, or like, how do we solve that problem?
Yeah, it's a big problem, and it's quite complicated. I would take a step back, and before I answer that question, kind of remind or just tell people about what my general stance is, right? So one underlying philosophy of mine, and I also training, is in something called harm reduction psychotherapy. I'm a harm reductionist. And so what for me a harm reductionist is it includes the freedom of individuals to have a relationship to substances, psychedelics or otherwise, in their own way. And we know when it comes to psychedelics that I think we do have to be careful to not just see these as pure only psychiatric treatments. There are indigenous peoples, and not just indigenous peoples, who have a relationship to psychedelics or plant medicine, other psychoactive sources. That's really important for their life, their spiritual development, their relationship to something that is very, very deeply meaningful to them and to community. And so I want to acknowledge that I would like to see a future where people can be in safe, legal relationship with these compounds that's not necessarily within a psychiatric structure. That being said, my perspective, and this is also Fluence's mission, is to train psychotherapists. And I'm sorry if this is just my view, is that, like, if you want to provide psychotherapy, you should be licensed as a psychotherapist. And there are reasons for that. It's not just like, well, I'm a therapist and everybody should do it, and necessarily psychotherapy is like the way that is the one size fits all. In particular, my concern is around training in ethics and ethical practice, and also what are the consequences if a psychedelic therapist somehow acts in an unethical way. And we've heard about this. It's covered a lot right now, both in a clinical trial context and in underground settings where there are ethical violations. What a license does is that if a person is licensed and they do something, they breach confidentiality, which I imagine is probably even a bigger issue. Well, a bigger issue than sexual violation, not in the sense that it's more egregious, but in the sense that I would bet it probably happens a lot more often. Again, not like we have to, they're both bad, but when it comes to psychotherapy, breach of confidentiality is up there in terms of a really, really, really big, it's explicitly prohibited, and you can lose your license for this. So back to my point, if we don't have any kind of mechanism to prohibit people from continuing to do the work, if they are do something wrong or penalize them for some period of time, then we're kind of removing one of the safety mechanisms that's built into the system that we've created in the United States. Now, I can also acknowledge that, like, for indigenous healers in indigenous communities, where it's a community, it's a different culture and system where accountability exists in a different way. right? Where maybe if there was some breach, that person is ostracized. And again, I don't know enough about those communities to speak to it with authority, but there are other mechanisms. And so the thing that, I try to do and we're trying to do is like, how do we create a great system that kind of can allow everybody to have access to the experiences and healing that they need to have access to in a way that is also compatible with our US kind of culture and system, which may include also making certain changes to the system if we can. But that's also a really big goal. So I shared a lot there, but that's some of how I think about it.
No, and this is great. And I agree. I mean, it's a strange world that we're entering into, right? And it's all happening so fast and the demand is so high and the mainstream media is constantly touting the psychedelics as this, like, oh, this will fix everything, which, we all know, yes, it's with the therapy, with the integration, with the daily practice, with the tools.
Yeah.
So then what about this place in between? I'm curious what you think of. The reality is there's underground, whether it's ceremonies or circles or underground therapists, we all know they're all over the place. Then what is the key for, how do we handle the ethics and the training and, this whole system of, well, I can't actually get psychedelic-assisted therapy because maybe there isn't someone in their community, or maybe the person's wait list is 2 years, or maybe they just quite literally can't afford it. So then they turn to some kind of underground practitioner. And we can't deny that the underground is happening and it's growing very quickly. So do you has this been talked about within, the community that you're a part of, the doctors, the people doing the research about how to then either make this more accessible or, put something in place that helps with the fact that there is underground work happening? It's not.
Yeah, so there's a few, kind of pick apart some of your questions. So one, I would say that MAPS and other organizations in the psychedelic research space, and also not just research, but other emerging companies are there's a good portion of them that are totally obsessed with the question of how do we increase accessibility and affordability. Organizations that are looking to create insurance companies specifically for psychedelics, or other kinds of insurance, I don't know what you call them, I guess you could say products, some sort of systemic thing that can allow for this, for accessibility to improve. That's sort of separate in my mind from the obviously it's interconnected, but that question and that solution is slightly different from the question that you had about underground therapists. And I'll speak to a little bit about how we teach about that at Fluence. When we train licensed professionals. Just to say that anybody can take most of our classes. They don't have to be licensed, but for a certificate program and we have a consultation group where people are talking about patients in a de-identified way, but it's case presentations and feedback. That you have to obviously be a licensed therapist and have a scope of practice that you're working in. But when we're talking about underground therapy exists, probably, I imagine it's going to continue to exist. And when one of the core trainings that we have at Fluence is in harm reduction and integration for psychedelics, which also includes preparation too. So, and when we talk about that subject, we talk about how therapists can be part of this system that kind of exists in parallel to underground therapists. So underground therapists, one of the, I think, weaknesses of underground therapy, and I'm painting a broad brush here, but generally what underground therapists tend to be focused on is the delivery of they might do a prep session or a few, they're focused on the psychedelic dosing session. There's a bit of integration, but that's not happening within the context of a longer term psychotherapeutic relationship. They just, again, I'm painting with a broad brush, but that takes so much energy an effort to be delivering these dosing sessions, that they may not necessarily have time for these longer therapeutic relationships. And this is where a kind of a psychedelic preparation and integration trained therapist can come in and add that longer term relationship, that context, that more preparation, more integration to what that underground therapist is doing. Just to go into this a little bit deeper, of course, how that's navigated has to be very, very careful, because when a licensed therapist makes a referral to an underground therapist, what we teach is don't do that, because they're not that, we have any control over people. The individual therapist has to make their own decision about the level of risk they want to take if they're going to refer to an underground therapist, but they just need to be educated about that risk, because it can be seen as not something that is necessarily legally defensible to the aforementioned governing bodies, right? If there's a complaint, and things can get really sometimes complicated and sticky in underground therapy. There's one, I'm thinking of a scenario where, you have really great relationships. The therapist is on board, the underground therapist is great. The patient or participant or person is just like really appreciating everything that's happening, and all the confidentiality there is secure. But say the person undergoing their psychedelic healing decides to disclose to a family member or a close friend that they're seeing an underground therapist, and maybe even like who that underground therapist is. That close friend or family member might say, "Oh my gosh, this is illegal. We have to notify the police," or whatever kind of scenario. And so the key point here is that the patient undergoing the healing, or the person undergoing the healing, doesn't owe confidentiality to either the above ground therapist or the underground therapist. In the licensed world, the therapists have to be confidential to their patient, but not vice versa.
Wow, I'm so glad you just spoke to that, because it's interesting. I actually had something happen to me last year where someone I didn't even know, who I had never heard of, referred one of their clients to me to then find out where they could go do things, which, by the way, I don't refer anybody, including my own clients, to anything, period. Like, I have very strict boundaries. I just say, okay, go to a country where it's legal, or, go ask someone else. But that is interesting. And that's a really great perspective. And I know that will help shed a lot of, knowledge on this audience watching, because I know there are a lot of people in this kind of this realm of doing a little underground, and also just the accessibility. Like, there is this demand, there is, people who are kind of getting desperate. And I can show you, I'm sure, I have desperate emails. Like, I don't know who else to ask. I saw you on the internet. Let me reach out to you. Where can I go? And I actually, there's only so many people listed that are legal that I can even refer those, refer people to. But let's shift a little. Let's talk about what's going on with, if you're allowed to, I don't know where the limits are, but I'm curious to hear a little bit more about psilocybin in these trials, because this is a realm that we all know is very underground, right? Psilocybin is very popular. There's now courses on microdosing that you can buy from big media leaders out there. How to grow mushrooms. But what is, and then Oregon passed this amazing measure, but what's really happening, and what do you think the potential is for the future of psilocybin in not only therapeutic settings, but maybe other settings like end-of-life therapy or end-of-life doula work, or this work that Paul Stamets is very passionate about, that is not necessarily in the therapeutic realm. But what do you see happening behind the scenes with psilocybin?
So, you had actually reminded me of something which I want to add onto our previous conversation, which is, and I think this is partly one of your objectives in your podcast, is that I think a lot of my observation is that many people are really excited about being in the dosing session and administering the psychedelic. And I'll say for myself, as somebody who loves the psychotherapeutic process and relationship, there can be so much power and excitement and interest in the preparation and particularly the integration process. And so for somebody who's listening to the podcast, who's maybe a massage therapist or an acupuncturist, or the list can go on and on and on. Although they may not be administering legally the psychedelic, they can be doing psychedelic integration work somatically in all sorts of different ways, and kind of experience the gratitude and the positivity of being able to help other people through their psychedelic process that doesn't necessarily involve the administration of the compound or plant. To your question about psilocybin, it reminds me, I have one of my mentors, my PhD advisor, incredibly sharp man. He always asks me this question, which then the questions just sit with me for years. And I'm like, and one of the questions he asked me years ago was something like, he said something like, how do you think that psilocybin, or psychedelics more generally, but let's just take psilocybin, how do you think that that's affecting or working when it seems from the trials to be helpful for anxiety related to end of life, smoking cessation, alcohol use disorder, OCD? Then there's future studies looking at, let's not talk about future studies. Let's talk about the studies where there already is a good signal that it's helping. So he asked me, well, how do you understand that? And it is the reason why that's such a good question is because diagnostically, from a sort of psychiatric perspective, these are thought of traditionally as distinct disorders, to use that language. Usually we don't see medication that can kind of help so many diverse issues. We get into my favorite topic, which is a mechanism of action. How is the therapy and the psychedelics doing what they're doing? I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because we could spend a lot of time there, but it seems like there's probably many different ones. And in terms of what's on the horizon, I think we'll be seeing clinical trials that are focused on exploring whether psilocybin could be helpful for people who have really, how do you say this word, intractable problems, meaning both psychiatric, but potentially even more physiological issues where there are no treatments. There are no current treatments to help those people, and an exploration of whether psilocybin could help or not. And we have to stay open-minded, right? We got to remember that these things aren't panaceas, but to begin to explore what are the boundaries of what they could help. And that's really exciting. Things like pain disorders, right, which have both a physiological and a psychological component, would be an example of that. Or I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I know Johns Hopkins' Alzheimer's is on their list of things that they want to explore with psilocybin.
Incredible. And that would actually be really nice. My stepfather passed away from Alzheimer's a few years ago. And before, when he was first diagnosed, which, we saw it coming, I was the one saying how about we try some microdosing, especially at that point when you already have dementia, what's there to lose? But yeah, no, this is really interesting. And I can't wait to see how this all pans out. But you actually did say something very important. And this is something that's come up a lot for me over the years, and every interview I've done, most conversations I have, and conversations I have with my clients around, it actually isn't about the psychedelic. The psychedelic is a small portion of it, but it is the integration where the results really, truly happen. And I speak this just from my own personal experience as someone who's been working with psychedelics since, for over 25 years now. But the real growth and, healing that I had, which, never ends, it continues as always, was through the daily work, through the weekly work with an actual therapist, and it wasn't psychedelics once a week, and it wasn't psychedelics even once a month. It was really this daily integration of, okay, what is this all helping you with? What is this teaching you? What are you bringing back to your life? It's not that it's going to just fix everything. And I'm curious, as a psychotherapist who's been kind of on this cutting edge for a long time, Do you find that you do get a lot of this, there is this sense of people just wanting to just take the medicine and hope that it fixes everything? Because I get that sense, and that's just like regular conversations that I have. But I'm also curious about the integration piece of what you guys are teaching at Fluence and with your work.
So I'll say, okay, on the question of is that something I see where people are continuing to return to the medicine, so to speak, and that's sort of more of we teach a little bit about spiritual bypassing, which is sort of I was reading, John Wellwood is the one who came up with that term, and he talked about people have different ideas of. I had the wrong idea of what that meant, and reading him really helped me to understand that what it is. It's about the neglect of a developmental need, that whether it be not necessarily psychedelics or meditation or whatever, it's about trying to perhaps bypass or skip over something in a person's development, wanting to sort of jump ahead. And I thought that was a helpful clarification. I'll be honest with you. I've seen that happen where there's like this desire to continue to use a psychedelic, and then the focus on the psychedelic rather than the healing process. But maybe it's just anecdotal, but from the people that I've worked with, it's kind of rare. Like maybe it's because they're in therapy and they're like engaged in it in that way. It's a selective group of people, confirmation bias. But the people that I work with, I have to say that that's not the relationship with psychedelics, which is I'm happy to say. One thing I'd like to also add that you had mentioned is the daily practice, which is true, right? It's there's an element of that that's definitely true. Just sort of continuing to be mindful and aware of how we are in the world and how that's sort of in alignment or not in alignment with how we want to appear or be. But I like to also say that a big part of the healing process that I see often left out of the conversation is the therapeutic or is the relationship. And that could be with a psychotherapist, or it could be with a friend, a family member, like whatever that exists there. The healing does not happen in a vacuum or entirely just within a single person. It happens also in community. That's also important to mention. And I think sometimes people get so focused on like, am I doing yoga every day, and am I journaling, and am I, like there's these, and it can become overwhelming, and sometimes it's not sustainable, and people take two steps back. And I think that self-compassion around our path for ourselves, and then also being in relationship to others, is perhaps even like an essential piece of the healing process.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And of course, that's a big one. And it's interesting because it's come up so much, the last 2 years with this lack of community that so many people are feeling, or the isolation, or the, distance, or the, feeling very alone on their journey. And yes, I mean, it's an interesting time that we're in with so much, just coming through, and the pandemic, and the new world that we're in, and then the growth of these therapies. And yeah, of course, 10,000 other practices that everybody's constantly telling you to do. But yeah, I'm curious what you at Fluence, and I also want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more about Fluence, but I'm curious, what is it that you teach or train when it comes to the integration in a therapeutic setting along with a psychedelic assisted therapist? Or is it just being in the long-term therapeutic process?
It's very difficult to summarize.
Yeah.
I wish I had an elevator pitch for it. We address both short-term and long-term therapy. And what we talk a lot about is, I focus a lot on the challenges that people can encounter. So the notion of like an unfolding process, the idea that sometimes things get worse before they get better. If a person is having a challenging experience afterwards, where they're in distress, feeling perhaps dissociated or overwhelmed, or having panic attacks, kind of making sure that a therapist doesn't panic and think that, like I did back when I first started my journey, like that the person has fried their brain forever. but rather understanding how what they're presenting with may be understood within the context of who they are and their larger journey. So those are the kinds of topics that we teach. They're not really easily summarized in like, here are the techniques. It's kind of the one way that I like to talk about is that we offer a perspective for therapists or anybody who comes to our training to bring their own skill and their own knowledge and perhaps their own like orientation and use their skills that already exist through the lens that we're helping them develop.
Yeah, no, that's good. And of course, can't be done in 5 minutes. But speaking of 5 minutes, we only have a couple more minutes left. So I wanted you to talk about Fluence. It's really interesting. I've been following what you guys are up to for a while. And, I get the emails and I hear about trainings. I forward it on to people I know. But tell people a little bit about what Fluence is up to now. And then also where is it going in the future, if you're able to share?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for your support. Just by the way, not only can I not summarize it in 5 minutes, I have a hard time summarizing it in 8 hours, but that's also part of the learning process, right? Like the dialogue. So what are we up to? Well, one thing I should say is that everything that we've offered so far and that we're offering right now is live learning. So we don't have any kind of, at the moment, download this video, watch it on your own. It's all engagement. And so we have workshops where we have maybe 40, 50 people that are weekend long. And so that's probably our largest group. But the bulk of what we offer are what we call reading groups and consultation groups, which are anywhere from like 6 to 12 people who are meeting with one of our teachers. It could be myself, Jeff Gus. There's a whole list of them. Most of them actually have clinical trial experience with psychedelics, and they have a particular expertise, whether it be psychopharmacology or psychoanalysis. And so that's sort of the bulk of what we offer. We have a certificate program, which is a lot more of a commitment in terms of getting a certificate in psychedelic integration therapy or a certificate in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. But the neat thing is that everything that we offer is modular. So you can take some of our classes and not have to pay for a full certificate and see if you like it. And if you think, oh, this is awesome, I want to do a full certificate, the payments that you've made towards whatever class go against the full certificate fee. And most people don't necessarily take the certificate. It's for people who really want to have a deep dive. But that's something that's already all set up. In the future, one thing that I can say is that I'm really interested in what I had mentioned actually earlier, where I spend a lot of my time, which is how do we move from providing an information dump? And I think we do more than that. We also include meditation. We have an experiential retreat. I don't want to undersell what we do, but I want to figure out okay, how do we upgrade that further so that we're really helping people hone and develop their skill more and more and more and more. And so that's what I think you can expect from Fluence in the next 6 months to a year and onward.
Yes. And it's so needed right now. I mean, this is, the word scale, right? Like, how do we get this out there? How do we expedite it and do it in a really, high integrity way? Of course, not putting anybody in danger, the harm reduction, but there is a need for this, right? And it is moving very fast. So I'm so glad you guys are working on this and doing the really amazing, powerful work that you're here to do. And the world needs this. So Dr. Gorman, it was such an honor to have you. Feel free to share anything that's coming up next. This will probably air in, I think, February, maybe in a few weeks. But yeah, what's anything that let's say a non-psychotherapist can go to? A training?
Yeah. Let me actually pull up my website.
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't even know.
There's so many events and
yeah. So we have an integration essentials reading group. So that's for people who really want to take a deep dive into integration. That's more than just our weekend workshop. For those who are looking for more of an introductory experience with integration, we have our Premise and Promise workshop. That's a shorter commitment that's coming up at the end of this month. One thing that I'm actually really, really excited by is that we have 2 reading groups that we're going to be launching in psychedelics and psychoanalysis. And people might be surprised, but this is one of our hottest and most in-demand topics. And people are really interested in psychoanalysis. I'm very fond of psychoanalysis. And so we have Jeff Guss and another author, Lawrence Fishman, who is absolutely fantastic. And they've developed another class together. So there's more. I'll also mention, if you really want to take a deep dive into psychopharmacology, in March, Kellen Thomas, who is a psychiatric pharmacologist who's an expert in psychedelics, will be doing a 12-week reading group on that topic. So that's just a selection of what's coming up.
Awesome. No, this is really great. Thank you so much. And yeah, psychoanalysis and psychedelics. I'm like, wow, that's, I don't know anybody else really doing that. So that sounds really interesting. Dr. Gorman, I really appreciate your time. And thank you so much for being here. And most of all, thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the world to help get these medicines out to more people, doing the clinical trial work, being at the forefront and a leader in this realm. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're feeling inspired, I'd appreciate it if you showed your love with a review. And check out my YouTube channel where you can find the video version of this podcast. You can also head to bethaweinstein.com to learn more about me and grab my free business growth trainings. Remember, you carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times.